She smiled for the cameras, her hand on the Duke's arm, a diamond ring on her finger, yet something in her eyes looked off. In Season 3, Episode 4 of The Gilded Age, Gladys Russell's fairy tale engagement turns into something much darker. Because this wasn't just a love story, it was a deal, a trap, and a lesson in how power can destroy freedom. What really happened behind the ballroom curtains? Let's uncover the truth that Bertha Russell hoped no one would ever find out. The announcement of Gladys Russell's engagement to Duke Colin Molyneux spread through New York faster than wildfire. The Russell household threw a grand party, gold-trimmed invitations, orchestras, and gowns flown in from Europe. Every socialite who once looked down on the Russells now fought for an invitation. For Bertha Russell, this was more than a celebration. It was proof that she had finally conquered the old money circles that once rejected her. Marrying her daughter into British nobility was the final step in her climb to power, but not everyone was convinced. Whispers floated among the guests. Some questioned why a titled British duke would suddenly want to marry a girl with no royal blood. Others noted the strange timing, especially after the duke had reportedly lost parts of his estate in England due to debts. Still, the illusion held. Bertha made sure of it. Her speeches, her posture, her cold smile, everything was perfectly designed to show the world that her daughter had won the golden prize. Gladys, however, didn't look like a girl who had just fallen in love. If viewers watched closely, they would have seen her hesitation. Her eyes moved carefully around the room, scanning faces, avoiding her mother's. When someone congratulated her, she forced a soft smile but gave no words. At one point, she walked to the edge of the ballroom alone, gripping her gloves so tightly her knuckles turned white. A servant noticed and quickly looked away. These small, quiet signs were not mistakes. They were cries for help that no one dared speak of. Behind the glamour, Bertha had carefully built this moment. She used her power, money, and quiet threats to bring the Duke to the table. Son love. Her offers included restoring part of the Duke's fortune with Russell Railroad money, investing in properties overseas, and even offering influence with American bankers. The Duke, whose noble name was worth more than his actual holdings, accepted, without much resistance. For him, marrying into the Russell family was a lifeline. For Bertha, it was victory. For Gladys, it was a silent surrender, even in the crowd. One person remained skeptical, Agnes Van Ryn. She watched the couple closely and whispered to Ada, "That girl is not marrying for love. She's being sold." But Agnes had learned to keep her battles limited. Her warning voice had been ignored before, and Bertha had risen too far, too fast. All she could do was watch. Knowing something dark had been set in motion, as the final toast was raised and the ballroom applauded, Bertha looked proud. The Duke looked relieved. And Gladys? She stared into her champagne glass as if it held the answers she desperately needed. The room clapped louder, but her thoughts were already drifting elsewhere toward a future she never asked for, and a life she may have to escape from. The Gilded Age Season 3, Episode 4 doesn't just tell us about a wedding. It reveals how, in a world built on money and reputation, even something as sacred as marriage can be used as a weapon. And Gladys? She's now at the center of it all, while the rest of New York toasted champagne and admired the Duke's polished smile. Bertha Russell was already thinking 10 steps ahead. This marriage wasn't about love, not for 1 second. It was about position, control, and reputation. For Bertha, every detail was calculated. She didn't just marry her daughter off to a duke, she purchased a legacy with American money, dressed it in lace, and made it sit still. What the public didn't know, and what Gladys would only discover too late, was that Bertha had made a private deal. Before the Duke ever proposed, he and Bertha met alone at the Metropolitan Club, far from the gossiping eyes of Fifth Avenue. There, Bertha laid out a silent contract. In exchange for marrying Gladys, the Duke would receive access to Russell, wealth enough to restore his failing English estate, cover his hidden debts, and present a false image of power back in London. The Duke didn't argue. His pride was long gone. All he had left was a title and a desperate need for money. Bertha was offering both salvation and silence, but the most chilling part wasn't the arrangement, it was how Bertha treated her daughter. Like an asset, not a person. When Gladys expressed doubts about the Duke, Bertha silenced her with cold, clipped words. "You will not ruin this," she said. "You will not embarrass this family." She reminded Gladys of the Russell name, of their position in society, and of how many doors this marriage would open. She spoke not like a mother, but like a commander issuing orders, and when Gladys cried, Bertha did not comfort her. Instead, she adjusted her gloves and walked away. Bertha had been planning this for years. From the moment she first stepped into New York society, she knew she'd need a grand victory to crush the old money families who mocked her. Gladys, beautiful and well-trained, was the perfect piece. She raised her like a duchess before she even met one. And now that the deal was done, Bertha saw herself as the queen behind the throne. Gladys would smile, attend galas, bear airs, and Bertha would sit at the center of New York's power web. Uncheckable dot. What Bertha didn't see, what she never expected, was that her daughter was no longer a quiet girl with folded hands. Inside Gladys, something had started to change. The coldness of her mother's manipulation lit a fire. She wasn't ready to fight yet, but she was done being silent, and as Bertha toasted to her daughter's future, calling it a victory for the family, she had no idea that the very arrangement she was so proud of would become the start of her own undoing. The Duke of Buckinghamshire entered New York society like a man carved from silver, shiny, untouchable, and cold. He wore his title like a crown, every movement smooth, every word measured. But episode 4 of the Gilded Age quietly tears that polished surface apart. Because beneath the medals and manners, the Duke was hiding rotten. Gladys was being tied to a man with more shadows than honor. It began with quiet rumors. Nothing loud enough to make headlines, but whispers floated in the corners of the opera houses and dining halls. The Duke, once a respected heir in Britain, had lost more than land. A failed investment in a copper mine, a brother scandal that drained the family fortune, private debts owed to discreet but dangerous men in Europe. Bertha Russell knew some of it enough to offer her wealth as bait, but not the full extent. And Gladys? She knew none of it, but one man started asking questions. Oscar Van Ryn? On the surface, he appeared indifferent, bored even. But Oscar had a talent for secrets, and something about the Duke didn't sit right with him. One evening, during a dinner at the Russell estate, Oscar noticed the Duke flinch at the mention of a name, Lady Everleigh. Curious, Oscar asked around. It didn't take long to uncover the truth. The Duke had once been engaged to a wealthy English heiress, until a scandal forced the family to break the engagement. No one knew the details, but the Duke left London for a fresh opportunity in America not long after. That wasn't all. A letter arrived in secret to the Russell home addressed to the Duke, but intercepted by a maid who couldn't ignore the heavy red wax seal. The letter, written in rushed handwriting, demanded repayment. It warned of consequences and threatened exposure. The Duke burned it in the fireplace, but not before Gladys accidentally saw part of it. The word debt was clear, and last warning. Gladys began to notice things. The way the Duke avoided certain topics. The way he flared with sudden anger when questioned. How his smiles were all surface, never reaching his eyes. One night, during a formal dinner, the Duke drank too much and spoke too loosely. He mocked American traditions. He made a cruel joke about buying brides like property. Gladys froze, the room went silent, and Bertha quickly covered it with laughter. But Gladys didn't forget, and then came the final blow. A young man appeared at the Russell residence, thin, sharp-eyed, with a British accent. He claimed to be a former employee of the Duke's family estate. In hushed words, he told a maid that the Duke had not only lost money, but had been part of a quiet cover-up involving a young servant girl back in England. Nothing had ever been proven, but the scandal had stained the estate. The staff had been paid off, the girl had disappeared, and the Duke had fled to America soon after. This wasn't just a marriage built on power. It was a trap laid with secrets. Bertha had bought a name, but the man behind it was slipping fast, and Gladys was beginning to see the cracks. And now, with this new knowledge, she faced a chilling truth. Her mother hadn't saved her from shame she had handed her over to. The question was no longer whether she could love the Duke. The question now was, how would she survive him? Gladys Russell had been trained for this life since childhood, trained to sit straight, smile politely, and never speak out of turn. She knew how to wear diamonds, how to curtsy, and how to keep her emotions buried under silk and satin. But nothing, not a single etiquette lesson, had prepared her for the cage her mother locked her in, not a golden one, but a quiet, choking one made of silence, shame, and the smile she had to wear beside the Duke. From the outside, everything looked perfect. She had the title, the mansion, the invitations to every grand event. But Gladys began to feel like she was vanishing. Every time she tried to speak, someone else spoke louder. Every decision was made for her. What she wore, where she sat, who she could write letters to, controlled, filtered, managed. The Duke said it was tradition. Bertha called it duty. But Gladys called it what it truly was, a slow erasing of herself. There were moments when her mask slipped. At night, alone in her room, she would tear the combs from her hair, collapse on the floor, and cry into the rug until her voice disappeared. In one scene, she's shown looking out the window at a passing carriage. In that moment, she wasn't thinking about the wedding or the future. She was imagining running, just grabbing her cloak and disappearing into the night. But where could she go? The world outside belonged to people like her mother and the Duke, people who bought and sold futures like stock. The only person who noticed the change in her was Mr. Maitland, a quiet artist hired to paint her portrait, while everyone else saw a bride-to-be. He saw the tension in her shoulders, the sadness in her eyes. During their sessions, he asked nothing. He just painted. But one day, as she sat in silence, he whispered, "You look like someone who wants to scream, but doesn't know how." She didn't respond, but her eyes filled with tears. And that was the first time in weeks she felt seen. Then came the night of the gala. Gladys was dressed in her finest gown, her neck heavy with borrowed jewels. The Duke held her hand, but it felt like stone. Midway through the night, she excused herself and walked into the garden. Alone, under the cold sky, she let her shoulders drop. She whispered to herself, "This is not love, this is not life." And in that moment, something inside her broke, but not in defeat. It broke like a shell, like something stronger was trying to come out. She didn't scream. She didn't run. But she made a silent vow. She would no longer play by her mother's rules. She might wear the title. She might play the Duchess. But she would find a way to take back her voice, her choices, her future, because Gladys Russell was not just a girl in pearls. She was her mother's daughter, but with fire in her blood. And that fire was about to burn through the lies,